Davitt, and good morning, everybody. Actually, Davitt just gave my speech. So I'm going to start over. Really do appreciate the invitation to be with you this morning. I want to thank PEC for their continued leadership in all of these issues, and for all of you for participating today in what I think is a very important conversation. As Davitt said, while the Clean Power Plan and stormwater management and Chesapeake Bay are vitally important topics and actually mission-critical topics for DEP, it's almost as interesting what's not included on the agenda today. And Davitt mentioned some of them. Subjects like shale gas development, the wave of infrastructure development that will be spun across the state like a spider web touching every single county in Pennsylvania. You might have heard about a little thing called Chapter 78, the Government Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force, but I will try to stay focused this morning. But there are some other things that we do need to touch on, like the reality and the accelerating pace of climate disruption, which threatens our environment, our public health, our economy, our way of life, and indeed the Penns Woods that we know today. And that's a subject that will worsen every single one of the challenges that you're discussing here today. So I consider that topic fair game. And there's one more topic that I will save for last. Let's get right to it. Really want to touch on all of the subjects that we'll be working on today. Let me start with the state implementation of the Federal Clean Power Plan. As you all know, on August 3rd of this year, the EPA released the final version of the Clean Power Plan, and I was privileged to be in the East Room of the White House when the President announced the plan. The Clean Power Plan sets carbon dioxide emission standards for power plants and establishes a goal of a 32% nationwide reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. For Pennsylvania, our goal is to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 33%. And our intention is to draft a state plan that meets that requirement and submit it to EPA by September 6th of next year. The plan that we will submit will be tailor-made for our state's economy and people, protecting our indigenous resources and positioning Pennsylvania to continue to be a net energy exporter. So in order to do that, DEP is listening first and writing second. We're seeking the comments and feedback of stakeholders, citizens, industry, advocates, General Assembly throughout this process. We view the Clean Power Plan as presenting some major opportunities for Pennsylvania. First, it's an opportunity to engage with our citizens and stakeholders. We believe at DEP, as the government does, that a government that works is a government that listens. So we're conducting an unprecedented 14-city listening tour around the state. We have 8 of those sessions down and 6 more to go. And we've kicked off a 60-day public comment period that will end in early November. We're in full listening mode, and we're asking Pennsylvanians to advise us on how we meet the goals of the Clean Power Plan. And very importantly, of the 14 listening sessions that we've scheduled, 10 of them are either in or adjacent to environmental justice communities. That's communities where 20% or more of the population live in poverty, and or 30% or more of the population is minority. Typically, those populations are disproportionately impacted by not only the cost of electricity, but the burdens of pollution. It's a welcome area of emphasis by EPA, and it's also the right thing to do, to engage vulnerable populations about this issue. And we're committed to ensuring that affordable, reliable energy is available to these communities, as well as reducing the pollution that harms them. I really do think that there's an enormous opportunity for us to demonstrate sustainability to the nation. We see opportunities for industry as resulting from the Clean Power Plan. We believe that we can continue to be a net energy exporter and maintain that role and create jobs that grow our economy while we cut pollution. Clean power is the key to generating jobs that pay in the 21st century, and we'll make sure that the plan for Pennsylvania encourages the industries that can provide it. We do believe that the goals of the Clean Power Plan are ambitious, but we also believe that they're achievable. In terms of compliance opportunities in Pennsylvania, we're in a unique position because of our diverse energy portfolio. For example, we're first in the nation for electricity exports and the second biggest generator state in the nation. We're number 2 in nuclear energy. We've become almost overnight the number 2 natural gas producing state. We're 4th in coal production, 12th in solar production, and 16th in wind capacity. So we clearly have a diverse energy mix and a rich set of indigenous resources that are inextricably linked to our economy, and they're going to play a role in our thinking, along with renewable energy and energy efficiency, as we develop a clean power plan that works for Pennsylvania. Moving on, stormwater management, a big and looming issue for Pennsylvania. I know a little bit about stormwater management and all things sewers from personal experience. As David said, I took office as mayor of Hazleton in Luzerne County 27 years ago. I was 6. And we faced, as I walked in the door, a consent order from what was then DER, a building ban and an order to fix an overflowing sanitary and storm sewer system. We had a combined sewer system in Hazleton. And we faced a bill that ended up totaling well over $6 million. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, especially when you consider the immensity of the problems. For example, Alcoasand faces $3 billion. But for a small city of 24,000, a $6 million bill, which was 50% bigger than the municipal budget at the time, was a pretty big deal. So I became one of PennVest's first customers back in the day. So I have some experience on the ground with this issue. And in 2009, when I was chief of staff at DCMAR, I remember doing a paddling tour into Pittsburgh. And it was one of those days where it was safe to boat as long as you didn't come in contact with the water. That's actually the warning, the public health warning that is put out on certain days in Allegheny County. So I get the issues of stormwater and sewer management. And certainly now as DEP Secretary, you're familiar with our role on regulatory compliance. We also aspire to be a good partner. In the very early days of the Wolf administration, Mayor Peduto and County Executive Fitzgerald approached us about their earnest desire to make sure that green infrastructure was being incorporated into water quality planning in Allegheny County. And as a result of those conversations, we're working very closely with EPA and with 83 municipalities in Allegheny County to draft consent orders and agreements that would allow the consideration of green infrastructure in their water quality planning. DEP is also working to promote the use of green infrastructure in a number of other ways, including direct funding. We implement or help to implement a number of grant and loan programs to facilitate the installation of green infrastructure. For example, in 2010, PennVest financed 9 green infrastructure projects totaling almost $14 million. These projects included best management practices like green roofs, vegetated swales, infiltration beds, cisterns, green streets, tree planting, and pervious paving. We're also implementing the EPA-funded Special Appropriation Program, where grantees have installed green infrastructure as part of their practices in Allegheny County. And we also do some important public education. We have an environmental education grant program, which offers small grants to local governments and environmental groups to spread the word about green infrastructure and other initiatives. But obviously, there can't be a conversation about stormwater without a discussion of what its connection is to economic growth and to communities' quality of life. And you see that I think most spectacularly in Pittsburgh, where the city has turned and faced the river and embraced the river system and created trails and walkable communities and bike opportunities and just really increasing the cool factor. So there is an immense connection between clean water and economic development, and certainly the connection to quality of life and public health improvement is urgently important work. So we at DEP are trying to do what we can with the resources that we have, but we know it's not enough. And more about that in a little bit, because before I get to that subject of resources and not enough, I want to pile on and turn to my third topic, and that is climate disruption. Climate disruption places additional challenges to critical infrastructure, to community resilience, to water quality, water quantity, and to stormwater management. And you may know that scientists at Penn State University recently completed a climate impacts assessment report for the Commonwealth that is, in my view, profoundly disturbing. Our climate in Pennsylvania is warming, and the warming trend will continue at an accelerated rate. Pennsylvania has already warmed 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit in the last century. Now that in and of itself is significant, but it gets vastly worse. We are on pace in Pennsylvania for 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming per decade between 2000 and 2050. so that by 2050, Pennsylvania, on average, will be 5.4 degrees warmer than it was in the year 2000. We're actually on track in Pennsylvania for 3 degrees centigrade of warming by mid-century. Now, you're probably all familiar with the internationally accepted standard that we've got to keep climate disruption and global warming below 2 degrees centigrade to avoid the worst implications of climate change. Pennsylvania is on track for 3 degrees centigrade warming by 2050. So by 2050, Philadelphia will feel like present-day Richmond, Virginia, and Pittsburgh will feel like present-day Washington, D.C. Think about that. Our state's climate is marching inexorably southward. And with that warming has come disruption of the global water cycle and an increase in the number of extreme precipitation events, higher stormwater volumes, increased urban flooding, higher sediment output, river health degradation, impaired water quality, and all the rest. So climate disruption is going to intensify and is in fact already intensifying risks to Pennsylvania's water resources that are already stressed. It compounds the problem of stormwater management that you'll be talking about today. So communities must take seriously their responsibility to protect water supplies and to manage stormwater. There's a huge need for more emphasis on climate resiliency, on climate resilient practices, the use of green infrastructure to address problems caused by climate change. We want to strongly encourage communities across the Commonwealth to follow the example of the great work being done on green infrastructure in Lancaster, in Philly, and in Pittsburgh, and throughout Allegheny County. And perhaps especially like the 47 communities in York County that have gotten together and that are exploring the creation of a stormwater authority. That's a model that I would like to see replicated across the state. But despite all these efforts, there is no avoiding the question of resources. I know that as Vice Chair of Penvest, I really do understand the enormity of the task. In fact, in 2008, as part of the National EPA Clean Water Needs Survey, EPA identified a national need of $64 billion for CSO infrastructure improvements and an additional $42 billion for stormwater management. Pennsylvania's totals, again in 2008, were $8.7 billion for CSOs and $6 billion for stormwater management. Now, consider the Growing Greener 2, which was enacted during the Mondale administration, at $625 million, was the largest environmental bond ever enacted in the Commonwealth's history. So, $625 million compared to $6 billion for stormwater. There are clearly limits to state support, and there's no substitute for local effort. But it really does beg the question of that currently absent state support. So hold that thought as I turn to topic number 4, because I'll end with topic number 5 and that whole question of dollars. And now we come to one of my personal favorites, achieving the 2017 pollution reduction goals for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. You all know that half of the land area of Pennsylvania drains to the Chesapeake Bay from 4 major river basins, and that Pennsylvania comprises 35% of the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. The Susquehanna River is the largest tributary to the bay, providing 90% of the freshwater flow to the upper bay and half of the total freshwater flow to the bay. Very simply stated, the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay can't be restored without Pennsylvania's support. But more important, water quality in Pennsylvania must be restored. Since 1985, Pennsylvania has invested more than $4 billion through various loan and grant programs toward Chesapeake Bay restoration efforts. That investment has resulted in a 25% phosphorus reduction, a 6% nitrogen reduction, and a nearly 15% sediment reduction. So we're on track in Pennsylvania for meeting phosphorus reduction goals, but we're not meeting nitrogen and sediment goals. And it's pretty clear that Pennsylvania must change its approach for the Chesapeake Bay. Since January, since the Wolf administration took office, we have been working to what we call Reboot Pennsylvania's Bay effort. I've been working very closely with Secretary Redding at the Department of Agriculture, Secretary Dunn at DCNR, and with a slew of partners and stakeholders to refocus the conversation. And we have been focused on a number of very, I think, critical questions. How do we put more high-impact BMPs on the ground in targeted areas where the water impairment is worst? How do we improve record keeping, reporting, and data systems? How do we create a culture of compliance? what is the role of markets and technology in solving this problem? How do we identify the strategic, legislative, programmatic, or regulatory changes that will give Pennsylvania the additional tools and the additional resources that we will need to meet the 2025 TMDL reduction goals? Those challenges are daunting. The Bay watershed is home to 33,600 farms. DEP currently has 6 agricultural program inspectors, and only 3 of them are devoted to Bay work. The Bay watershed has 206 MS4 communities and over 10,000 sites and permits. Now, we have some staff who contribute to MS4 inspections, but we have 0, say it again, 0 MS4 inspectors dedicated to the Bay or to the program statewide. The most credible study of funding needs for the Bay was a 2013 Pennsylvania State University Environmental and Natural Resources Institute report that provided 2 estimates of what the TAB is, again, to restore water quality in Pennsylvania and by virtue of that, Chesapeake Bay. And the Penn State study estimated a need of $3.6 billion in capital costs to fully implement all non-point source BMPs and WIP in incremental levels between 2011 and 2025. And they further calculated annualized cost to include operation and maintenance of about $378 million per year. 378. In federal fiscal year 2014, $147 million combined federal and state funding was spent on programs to address nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction statewide. About $128 million of that, or 87% of it, was used for BMP deployment. So 128 versus 378. So you can see we're a little short. It's clear that Pennsylvania agencies and indeed all Pennsylvanians in the Chesapeake Bay watershed must be engaged in protecting and restoring local water quality. We all have to live up to the requirements of Pennsylvania's Clean Streams Law. Improving local water quality will ultimately restore the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. To achieve that, comprehensive, focused approaches implemented with local support are essential for success. But it brings us back to the question of resources for staffing and for BMP deployment. So whether it's stormwater management or meeting Pennsylvania's water quality needs, it really comes down to a question of resources. And that brings me to my final topic, the state budget. Pennsylvania has no shortage of environmental challenges and opportunities, but perhaps the biggest environmental challenge we face is more basic, and that's our state budget. The ability of DEP to meet its basic functional requirements, let alone these challenges and opportunities that I talked about this morning, are hanging in the balance. Governor Wolf's administration inherited a DEP that not only had a problem with the Bay, but a DEP that has lost 14% of its complement over the last 10 years, compared to a state government-wide average of 6% decrease in staff in the same time period. What does that mean? It means that right now today, DEP has 671 less positions than we did 7 years ago. And over 400 of those positions are inspection and permitting staff. And if that's not enough, we're saddled with 1990s technology at DEP. Our information technology budget in 2004 was $23 million. So if you just factored in inflation today, it should be $28, $29 million. Well, today, our IT budget is $16 million. A little over half of what it was 11 years ago when adjusted for inflation. We have a hole we've got to dig out. And I'm committed to improving our performance, our business processes, our permit decision guarantee batting average, which incidentally currently stands at 89%. We want to streamline wherever we can to better serve the regulated community. We need to build better systems because they're essential to our performance in meeting these environmental challenges. But to do that, we have to rebuild, and that means invest in DEP's IT capacity. Now, we're developing a strategic plan to do that, but it's going to take time and money to make it happen. Governor Wolf campaigned on the need for a growing greener 3. He understands Pennsylvania's environmental needs and all the challenges we face, as well as the opportunities. But that kind of bold proposal will require bipartisan majority support. something that is currently in very short supply in Harrisburg. In February, Governor Wolf proposed the largest general fund budget increase for DEP in memory, almost 6%. But we still don't have that budget. We don't have any budget, and we face a budget crisis. If we continue the one-time fiscal gimmicks of the last few years, we'll be looking at a structural budget deficit 8 months from now of about $2.3 billion. Now, the governor is doing everything that he can to fix this in a responsible way. But if the Commonwealth is to meet our environmental challenges and seize the opportunities, we will need additional resources at DEP, in communities, and for farmers. But crafting a responsible plan to obtain these resources and invest them wisely is not really solely up to Governor Wolf. And certainly isn't up to me. In a very real way, I would like to suggest this morning that it's up to you. John F. Kennedy, in Profiles of Courage, wrote that in a democracy, every citizen, regardless of his interest in politics, holds office. Every one of us is in a position of responsibility, and in the final analysis, the kind of government we get depends upon how we fulfill those responsibilities. President Kennedy wrote that we, the people, are the boss, and we will get the kind of political leadership, be it good or bad, that we demand and deserve. Folks, I think that Governor Wolf is certainly committed to enhancing the partnerships that we have, the partnerships we need to have to meet our environmental challenges and the opportunities we face. But we need all of you to be partners. We need every citizen in this Commonwealth to step up and protect our state's water quality, to look to the future and to build a stronger future for our children and theirs. Because in the final analysis, our fellow citizens are